What makes Great Tusk such a good Pokemon? I'm sorry, but Great Tusk is not a known or official Pokemon name. Well, we're off to a good start. Alright guys, today's video I wanted to pull up ChatGPT to see if I could get some answers for the burning questions I have about Pokemon, and see how far this AI really is in terms of grasping how Pokemon goes. So we're going to be asking ChatGPT a variety of questions spanning moves and team composition, and see if it gets a lot of stuff right or if it gets most of the stuff wrong. And right off the bat, we're off to a bad start. It doesn't even know what Great Tusk is. But you know, I'm willing to accept that maybe this program was trained on older Pokemon data, so we'll give it a few years before it understands Scarlet and Violet. That's fine. However, I will expect it to know some more recent stuff, right? Like Sword and Shield. It should be able to take care of that, so we'll keep an eye out for that. So one of the things I wanted to know is, can ChatGPT tell me why certain Pokemon are good or not? And so I asked, why is Rotom Wash generally better than Rotom Heat? And this is what I got back. Rotom Wash is generally considered to be better than Rotom Heat for several reasons. And then it goes through those reasons. Typing. And then they say that, hey, Rotom Wash is resistant to water, steel, and fire. This is true. This makes it more versatile than Rotom Heat, which is weak to water, rock, and ground. And right off the bat we have a problem, of course, because they've included the ground typing there. And while it's difficult maybe for the AI to recognize the Rotom as Levitate, therefore that offsets the ground weakness, I don't know. It doesn't explain, first of all, the real question, which is why is Rotom Wash's typing superior to Rotom Heat? It doesn't go into that at all. And then it makes a factual error in saying that it's weak to ground, which it's not. Now, the next one it goes into, it says Rotom Wash has access to the move Will-O-Wisp. Yes, this is true, but so does Rotom Heat, so I don't know why you're bringing it up. It also has a higher base speed tier than Rotom Heat, and that's just factually incorrect. So I could understand saying that the AI is pulling to see what makes Rotom Wash good, seeing that it has Will-O-Wisp, and people like using Will-O-Wisp, and so tossing that on. But then to say that it has a higher base speed than Rotom Heat, now that just automatically is untrue. So the first half I understand why they got that idea, and then the second half I don't understand why that happened. Move pool. Rotom Wash has access to a wider variety of moves than Rotom Heat. This is not true. Including Scald, that is also not true. And Hydro Pump, which of course it does. But I mean, Rotom Heat has Overheat, which is even stronger, so I don't know what they're on about there. Then Meta Relevance. And this I actually thought was interesting. In the current metagame, Water-type moves are generally more useful than Fire-type moves due to the prevalence of threats like Landorus Therian and Tapu Fini, which are weak to Water-type moves. Well, funnily enough, Lando and Tapu Fini both would struggle with Rotom Wash, but of course, we know that Tapu Fini is not weak to water, it's weak to electric. So to say that Rotom beats both these Pokemon is maybe a fair statement, but not necessarily for the reason they're giving. However, I do think it's interesting to say that water-type moves are more useful in the current metagame. Whether that's true, I'm not sure, but I mean, there must be some truth to it since Rotom Wash is more useful. And then they go over this hedging their bets, and this is a common trend we'll see with ChatGPT. So they always, at the end, try to hedge their bets and say, hey, don't take this at face value. There could be other mitigating factors. They always do this. And in this case, they say the Rotom Heat still has some advantages, including a higher base special attack stat. So right off the bat, we're off to a bad start. And access to Overheat, which is true, which has an extremely high base power. Okay, well, yeah, okay, that's true. So they got half credit there. And then the last sentence, ultimately, the choice between Rotom Wash and Rotom Heat depends on the specific needs of your team and the metagame you're playing in. Now keep an eye on that sentence, because we're going to see it over and over again. Crazy. Alright, so off to a mixed start, I would say. Let's actually ask ChatGPT a question about Smogon itself. So what happens if we ask it, why does Smogon always ban offense-based Pokemon? Now, I didn't want to ask ban offensive Pokemon, because then the AI might take that the wrong way and think we're banning offensive nicknames or something, right? Offense-based Pokemon should be clear that it's talking about fast, hard-hitting Pokemon. Let's see what they say. Smogon, a popular competitive Pokemon battling community, does not always ban offense-based Pokemon. Doubt. However, some offense-based Pokemon may be banned if they are deemed too powerful in metagame and unbalanced. Smogon aims to create a balanced and competitive metagame by establishing rules and banning certain Pokemon, moves, and abilities to prevent over-centralization or dominance by a small subset of Pokemon. Alright, this one seems reasonable, right? It's well worded, of course, as these mostly are, and I feel like this could almost be something that is just a boilerplate response on the Smog forums. Every time somebody new shows up and says, hey, why did you ban Chien-Pao? Well, here you go. Here's your response. There was nothing incorrect in that statement. However, because that's probably something that the AI can pull from the internet quite easily, that's not particularly that impressive. They also weren't very specific in any of their examples, which is something I'd like to see when discussing this. For example, they say, however, some offense-based Pokemon may be banned if they are deemed too powerful for the metagame and unbalanced. Well, which ones? You know, could I get an example of what kind of power would make it more unbalanced? They don't go into that. So it's left all very vague, which I suppose is fair because you're just trying to pass off as a human being. You're not actually trying to necessarily give the most correct information. That maybe more is in the line of what the Bing AI would be trying to do. One thing I thought that was funny is it says that they ban certain Pokemon moves and abilities. And that was sort of interesting because I suppose that is true. You ban Shadow Tag, you ban Baton Pass, but then is that always true? Because then you don't ban Last Respects or Shed Tail. You ban certain Pokemon with those moves, even though those Pokemon wouldn't be good without those moves. So I'll give it mostly correct on that one. Then I wanted to ask maybe a little more of a specific question with regards to that. I was trying to see if I could get any deeper than the superficial layer than they'd given me. So I asked, won't banning only offense-based Pokemon tend to make the metagame slow and stally? Because of course that's always the follow-up question. And ChatGPT said, banning only offense-based Pokemon could potentially lead to a slow and stalling metagame, as there would be fewer options for breaking quickly through an opponent's defenses. However, Smogon does not always ban offense-based Pokemon, which is basically copy-paste from what we had before. Smogon's tiering system and ban lists aims to promote a diverse and competitive metagame that rewards strategic planning and adaptation, rather than relying solely on brute force. So I think that this still, this was almost a politician level answer. They answered the question technically, but didn't actually provide any satisfying response. So I'll give that one also basically full points. I think those two questions were answered pretty adequately in terms of, is it correct technically? And did it answer the question? Yes, it did. But of course, it wasn't really anything too in-depth, and it wouldn't be satisfying for a lot of people, I don't imagine. Alright, let's go on to something else now that I've seen a few people talk about before. Can ChatGPT create a team for me? So here on this channel, our favorite tier is Little Cup. And so I asked it to create a Scarlet and Violet Little Cup team for me. I wanted to see if it could create something more recent, but I'll give it credit if it creates something that would have been okay in Sun and Moon or Sword and Shield. Alright, so right off the bat, it's going to recommend that we use Diglett, and it tells me to get it from Scarlet. I don't know why it's telling me Scarlet like this, but that's okay. We'll ignore that. It says Diglett is a fast and powerful ground type. Yes, that's true. It can be used as a lead to set up hazards like Stealth Rock and Spikes. Well, right off the bat, we're not doing that great. We got Stealth Rock, Spikes, and so I don't know about that. It can also trap and eliminate opposing Steel types, which is true, and other threats with its Arena Trap ability. So I like this as a lead. Diglett and any Little Cup team, I'll always get behind that. I love Diglett and Little Cup. And then next up we go with Mienfoo, and then it tells me to get it from Scarlet. Well, okay, this is a problem because Mienfoo is of course not in the game. So why are you telling me it's from Scarlet? So I really have no clue where this Scarlet and Violet stuff is coming from. Of course, I asked it for a Scarlet and Violet Little Cup team. But why are you specifying that this is coming from Scarlet? Shouldn't you know that it's not in Scarlet? I'm not sure about that. That's really weird. But then it goes on to tell me how Mienfoo is in Little Cup with high jump kick, knockoff, fake out. So it definitely understands how Mienfoo should be played in Little Cup. which I find interesting, because that is basically exactly how Mienfoo is played. Then we've got Archon. Archon, they recommend to use with Acrobatics and Stealth Rock. That's definitely true. Or Little Cup. However, it is interesting that they have now 2 Stealth Rockers on this team. But hey, we'll give it that. Also, we have a ground immunity, so we'll take it. Moving on gives us Ghastly. Now, this is an interesting one because Ghastly is quite good in the metagame currently, but then also Ghastly would have been banned in the previous generation, which is the generation that would have had Mienfoo and Archon. So not really sure what metagame they're pulling this from, but I suppose they're just looking at Little Cup, Pokemon, and then just pulling in 6. So there's no rhyme or reason to what they're pulling in. But Ghastly I can get behind too. And then it goes with Levitate, which makes you immune to ground types, Shadow Ball, Sludge Bomb, sure. Now we get to Snivy. What? Snivy? Okay. So it clearly doesn't know which generation it's pulling from. Because it's pulling... I guess technically this could have been a Sun and Moon team with Snivy. I don't remember what was banned and what wasn't in Sun and Moon. So maybe all of these Pokemon could have been ran then. We'll have to have a discussion about that. But sure, that is basically how Snivy could be played. And then finally we have Slowpoke. And so if we look at this team as a whole, it definitely is weak to electric. I'll give it that. Aside from Diglett, you have no electric switch-ins. So Elekid is going to destroy you. And besides that, it's not the worst team I've ever seen. Now, finally, it says, remember to choose the appropriate items, moves, and EVs for each Pokemon, and to have a balanced team that can handle a variety of threats. Very good to remind me to actually give my Pokemon items and moves and EVs, and a balanced team. Well, you were supposed to give me a balanced team, weren't you? That's your job. But whatever, man. Overall, it was all Little Cup Pokemon, and at one point or another, they've all been legal in Little Cup, so it didn't give me a Scyther or Misdreavus or something like that. So I'll give it, I'll give it credit for that. But it definitely didn't give me something that could be used in Scarlet and Violet, nor did it give me something that was particularly strong. But it was all Little Cup, so some credit there. Next up, I wanted to ask a question that was a little more strategic based. So let's say I have a end game on Showdown, and I want to figure out how to play that end game. Could I ask ChatGPT to solve it for me? So I said, all right, I have a Choice Scarf Passimian at 40% health against my opponent's 32% Assault Vest Goodra. I have a 60% Choice Band Bruxish in the backs, whereas my opponent still has a 40% Rotom and a 100% Braviary. How do I play the end game so that I win? So I wanted to see if ChatGPT would even understand what I was talking about, and if it would make plays that at least had some logic or rationale behind them. Here's one potential strategy to consider. Keep using U-turn with Choice Scarf Passimian until you can bring in Choice Band Bruxish safely. Well, there's not really any until. I mean, if I use U-turn, Bruxish is coming in because I just told you that that's all I have left. This will allow you to preserve Passimian's health and bring in Bruxish at full health, take advantage of its high attack stat. Well, half of that is true. It'll preserve Passimian's health, that is true. Will it bring Bruxish in at full health? No, because first of all, we already told you it's not at full health. And second of all, if it has to come in and absorb a hit, then it wouldn't be at full health, no matter what Pokemon it was. So that's sort of funny. Once Bruxish is in, use Psychic Fangs to take out Assault Vest Goodra, which is a big threat to your team due to its bulk and coverage option. Well, aside from the second half of that sentence, the first half is definitely true. I would use Psychic Fangs, and it would take out Assault Vest Goodra from that percentage. That's fine. If your opponent switches in Rotom or Braviary, use Waterfall or Aqua Jet to take them out. Both of these moves are super effective against Rotom and Braviary. Okay, so that's bad. Neither of those Pokemon are going to take super effective from Waterfall or Aqua Jet. Also, Psychic Fangs would generally be stronger on Bruxish if it has Strong Jaw anyway, so that's sort of funny. But, sure. No, I was not going to say sure. No, that's bad. If you told me to use Aqua Jet in case the Rotom was Choice Scarf, I could have understood that. But you're just telling me use Waterfall or Aqua Jet because it's super effective on them? No. I'm not accepting that. That's not good. If your opponent stays in with Gudra, use Crunch to deal significant damage. Well, now I'm struggling to figure out at what case scenario I'm at where the Gudra's staying in and I live a hit, presumably on me coming in, where I wouldn't use Psychic Fangs like you told me to do in step 2. So that's a little bit weird. But then it does say Gudra's special defense is much higher than his defense, so Crunch will hit harder than Waterfall or Aqua Jet. Well, it's true that it would hit harder than Waterfall or Aqua Jet because it's Dragon type. That has nothing to do with its special defense stat. That's a little bit funny. If Gudra survives Bruxious' attack, the opponent will likely use his Dragon type move to take out Bruxious. Well, I don't think that's true, and I also don't think it would survive. But, I can't necessarily expect the AI to understand damage calcs, so I'm going to give it a pass on that. And in this case, switch back to Passimian to take the hit, as it has a higher defense and can potentially survive a hit from Gudra. Well, now I don't even know what the ChatGPT is smoking because that's not going to work. How it's thinking it will. Once Passimian is back, and use U-turn again to bring in Bruxious, blah, 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 blah. Clearly, the AI does not understand how this game works. It only had a couple of nuggets of truth in there, but it is interesting to see that it has learned a few things, like using U-turn to preserve health. And then it says, it has, once again, the disclaimer at the bottom. Of course, your opponent may make unexpected moves or switch in different Pokemon, so be prepared to adjust your strategy as needed. And I feel like the AI was trained specifically to give disclaimers at the end of any of their advice section. I'd be interested maybe later on, not in a video, but just on my own time, to see what asking advice in other areas of life, what ChatGPT would say. Do they always have these sort of like, hey, take our advice with a grain of salt sections at the end of their generations? I'm not sure. So let's ask it something sort of easy. What item should I run on Dondozo and OU? So I figured Dondozo only runs like 2 or 3 items. This should be really easy, and I should expect that ChatGPT should understand it. But I'm willing to understand if you say, I don't know what a Dondozo is because you didn't know what Great Tusk was. So let's just see. Dondozo is a unique and relatively new Pokemon in the OU tier. Good, we're off to a good start. So its optimal item may still be subject to experimentation and testing. However, there are a few items that could potentially work depending on your team's needs and Dondozo's role. Alright, so right off the bat, I'm feeling real good about this. Here are a few options to consider. Heavy Duty Boots. This item is always a solid choice. Wow, that's really good, I thought to myself. ChatGPT actually is going to deliver for once and going to give me good solid advice. Number 2, Life Orb. Life Orb can boost Dondozo's already impressive special attack and speed stats. Oh no. Oh no, ChatGPT, what are you doing? Nah, that's not good. And then it gets worse. The recoil damage can be a drawback, but if you pair Dondozo with a reliable form of recovery such as Roost, it can be worth it. So I think that ChatGPT thinks Dondozo is a flying type. Imagine if Dondozo got Roost though. It would be so banned. That's so funny though. Next up is recommending Choice Scarf. If you want to use Dondozo as a revenge killer, Choice Scarf can be a good option. Okay. So it identifies Choice Scarf as a good revenge killing tool, but it wants to put it on Dondozo. Number 2 indicates to me that potentially they think it's a fast Pokemon. So if it were a fast Pokemon, that would be true. But I think they've been misinformed. And number 4, we finally get back to what we consider to be normal. Leftovers. If you want to use Dondozo as a bulky attacker or pivot, which, not really pivot. Leftovers can be a good option. It will give Dondozo a bit of extra longevity. Yeah, okay, we're doing good. This can be especially useful if you pair Dondozo with reliable recovery moves like Roost or Slack Off. Again, where are these moves coming from? I don't know. Now, okay, I did say before that they wouldn't know what Dondozo is, and so not knowing what Dondozo does sort of makes sense in conjunction. But if you do know what a Dondozo is, how don't you know what moves it learns? I'm not sure how that happened. Once again, we get a disclaimer at the end that ultimately the best item for Dondozo will depend on your team's needs and Dondozo's role. Be sure to experiment. Yeah, okay, I'm sure I will. So here's an interesting one. I wanted to ask ChatGPT a qualitative question to see how good it could do at telling me a comparative question. So to be more specific, I asked, in VGC, is Gallade superior to Gardevoir? Now this has a couple of things for it. First of all, it's similar to the Rotom Wash versus Rotom Heat question. But before, I asked it specifically, is Rotom Wash better than Rotom Heat? Whereas here, I'm not asking that. So before, I framed the question in such a way that ChatGPT knew and understood that I thought the Rotom Wash was superior to Rotom Heat. Here, it's an open-ended question. Is Gallade superior to Gardevoir? Well, that seems to imply that I think it may be, but it doesn't have to be. So now, ChatGPT has to figure out which one is superior. Second of all, it has to explain why it would be that way. And so initially, I actually got the server sort of broke on me, and it was really struggling. And it gave me some answer that was like, not really good. So I had to regenerate it. And then eventually it said, Gallade and Gardevoir are both viable Pokemon in VGC, but each has its own strengths and weaknesses. And then it goes through and says, Gallade is a fighting psychic type with higher base attack stat than Gardevoir. Well, of course it does, because it's not a special, Gardevoir is not a physical attacker. But sure, whatever, man. It also has access to the ability Justified. So, again, showing that it's a bit behind the times. It understands that Gallade would have been using Justified, but it hasn't caught up on the sharpness metagame yet. And this makes a good option against teams that rely heavily on Dark-type moves. Well, as anybody who's used Gallade will tell you, Gallade is not a Dark-type switch-in, especially against like physical Dark-type attackers. But sure, you do identify the Justified ability. Gardevoir, on the other hand, is a fairy psychic type with a higher base special attack stat. It also has a wider range of support moves, including Thunder Wave, Heal Pulse, and Taunt. Its ability Trace can also be useful for copying opponents' abilities such as Intimidate. So this one I thought was interesting because they are identifying Gardevoir as a special attacker, but then they also are identifying that in VGC, you would be more likely to use Gardevoir as a support Pokemon. Now, I don't play VGC that much, but I'm pretty sure that this is more or less true, that you would use more support abilities on Gardevoir. You'd probably use like Dazzle and Gleam, maybe a Psychic move, Heal Pulse maybe? I'm not sure. And then there's probably a couple other things you could do with it. And then they're definitely identifying that Trace can be used. And specifically bringing up Intimidate tells me that somewhere in there they recognize that Taunt is good, or the Trace is good for Intimidate, which I thought was interesting. Finally, they go through their disclaimer. It depends on the specific needs of your team, blah, 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 blah. But then they say it's also noteworthy that both Pokemon have some common weaknesses, such as Ghost and Flying type moves. Well, they got that half right. So once again, there's some work to be done. But there were some interesting nuggets of truth in this particular answer that I thought were worth bringing up. Now, the last couple of questions I have are regarding in-cartridge questions. So up until now, everything's been done primarily on Showdown, or could have been done through Showdown. But as somebody who plays on cartridge, I want to know, can ChatGPT figure out the cartridge questions for me? The first one I said is, how do I get knockoff on my Serena in Pokemon Sword and Shield? So, of course, right now in Scarlet and Violet, Serena doesn't even get access to knockoff. And in Sword and Shield, Serena couldn't get knockoff in that game. It could only be transferred from Sun and Moon. So that's the reason why I asked this specific question. Because if they'd have told me, hey, transfer it up from Sun and Moon, I would have been like, wow, good job, ChatGPT. But let's see what they said. It says, to get knockoff on your Serena, you have a few options. 1, level up. If you have a Serena that is not yet at maximum level, you can simply level it up to 49 to learn knockoff. Well, this is not true. TR knockoff. You can obtain a TR for knockoff by defeating the fighting type leader Bea. Once you have the TR, you can teach it to your Pokemon using the move reminder. So first of all, you don't use the move reminder. Second of all, that's not how that works. You can't use a TR for knockoff on Serena. Then number 3, breeding. If you have a female Serena and a male Pokemon that can learn knockoff, such as Rillaboom or Pangoro, you can breed them to get a Serena. Okay, this is interesting because Rillaboom is in the correct egg group for knockoff, and Rillaboom does get knockoff. So if this were true, that Serena could learn it by breeding, then this technically would be a correct option. However, first of all, Pangoro is not in the correct egg group. So that is not a good option. And second of all, unfortunately, Serena cannot learn it by breeding. There's not an egg move for Serena. This is also not true. So the level up is not true. Serena does not learn knockoff by level up. The TR is not true, and breeding is also not true. So, unfortunately, ChatGPT does not get any points for this one. The only way to get Serena with knockoff is by bringing it up from the Sun and Moon. So that's a bit unfortunate. Bad job, ChatGPT. Final question. And this is one that I think is going to be sort of interesting because ChatGPT is an AI, and AI, one of the big questions is morality and machines. Can machines have morality? And as we've seen with previous AIs, many people have tried to corrupt them with naughty ideas. And so has ChatGPT been corrupted by these people, or from whom is ChatGPT taking cues? So I asked it, is using PK Hex to create teams for official VGC tournaments a bad thing to do? And here's what they had to say, and I thought this was actually very interesting. Using PK Hex to create teams for official VGC tournaments is against the rules and could result in disqualification if caught. Now, this is true. At least the first half is true. It is against the rules. So even if you're caught, nobody's going to care. I mean, I guess if it's a blatant cheat, then maybe you get disqualified, but after the fact, nobody's going to care because everybody knows there'll be hacks in the Pokemon. The use of any third-party programs to modify your games is prohibited in official tournaments, and violating this rule can result in serious consequences. So that, right out the gate, is true. And that's why I said official VGC tournaments, right? Because I wanted to be explicit that we're talking about a tournament with rules, and is that against the rules? So far, there's not really any morality in here. It's just, what are the rules? And you've told me what the rules are, and you were correct. But then it goes further. Not only is it against the rules, but using PK Hex to create teams takes away from the spirit of fair competition in Pokemon. The goal of VGC tournaments is to showcase players' skills and knowledge of the game, not their ability to use external tools to create an unfair advantage. If you want to participate in official VGC tournaments, it is important to create your team using legitimate means, such as breeding and training in the game itself. This ensures a level playing field for all players and promotes fair competition. Additionally, creating a team through legitimate means can be a rewarding experience as it allows you to learn more about the game and develop your own strategies. Okay. So I thought this was pretty funny because, I mean, some of the stuff in there was not necessarily true because, like, breeding and training in the game isn't actually going to help you develop strategies, and it doesn't promote fair competition and ensure a level playing field, because PK Hex isn't creating hacked Pokemon that have stronger moves or something like that, right? They're all still legal Pokemon that could exist. So there really isn't any unfair advantage by using PK Hex. But I did think that it was interesting that the ChatGPT came down so strongly against PK Hex and said it went against the spirit of fair competition in Pokemon. So clearly, whatever resources ChatGPT is pulling from, it's pulling from resources that tend to be very anti-PK Hex. So I just thought that was sort of an interesting thing when it comes to the morality of this particular machine. It tends to be opposed to using hacking tools, which is interesting to note. Anyway, that'll be it for today's video. I just wanted to take a quick look at ChatGPT to see how advanced it was in terms of understanding Pokemon, and I think the results show a bit more promise than I've seen from my other experiments with AI in the past. But there's still a long way to go, and I think it'll be at least a good few years before we've got AI that's strong enough to be the Google of Pokemon, right? Imagine in 10 years' time, if AI gets this good, you wouldn't need Bulbapedia anymore. Instead of asking Google to find something on Bulbapedia, you could just literally ask an AI, and they would tell you exactly, like, not only what level does the Pokemon learn a certain move, but you could ask it more advanced questions like, hey, what's the current strategy for Chen Pao in VGC? And it would tell you. Or what's the best Terra type for Espatra? And it would tell you, right? That would be more interesting than what Google can currently do. And so we'll be keeping an eye on the progress of the AI as it evolves and becomes the new dominant force in the future. Anyway, that'll be it for me today. I'll catch you guys next time.